this one is going to be a bit tricky. Oh, there's plenty to like or even love this time around as well, but compared to what came before, this season just feels a bit off somehow. I wish I could be more specific, but I really can't quite put my finger on exactly what it is that makes this whole season feel more empty or shallow or some such. Something's definitely not quite right here though, but let's just get to it and you'll hopefully see what I mean. As you may or may not recall, the last season ended with Clark vanishing into some kind of void, while Chloe and her father got blown up, presumably by Lionel, who'd just been sentenced to prison for murdering his parents. 3 months later, we see that Chloe apparently left Clark a video message asking him to investigate in case of her death, but as he's not exactly around at the moment, it's not actually Clark that's viewing said message. It is in fact Lois Lane. That's right, this season introduces none other than Lois Lane, who, as it turns out, is actually Chloe's cousin. Now, at first glance, this seems like a rather strange addition, but in all honesty, it's actually one of the better changes to the overall mythos this series makes, and certainly one of the better elements of this season. Oh, I was skeptical myself when I first saw this, feeling like it was kinda premature and unnecessary, but especially upon watching it again, this might be one of the best versions of Lois ever. Oh, I'll freely admit that I'm not that well versed in every iteration of these characters or anything, but at least from what I can recall, this Lois is one of the more capable, likeable, and just well-rounded versions of the character in existence, and she's honestly a very welcome change from the other female characters in the show. Don't get me wrong, they all have their strengths, but neither Chloe nor Lana, especially not the latter, come anywhere close to being as proactive and independent as Lois. They're basically damsels in distress, whereas Lois takes no prisoners. They even do a pretty decent job of laying the foundation for Lois and Clark's eventual relationship, as they actually have some pretty decent chemistry. Oh, they do lean rather heavily into the whole opposites attract, would never happen, moonlighting-esque tropes and all, but I for one definitely prefer and believe that more than the constant we're meant for each other but oh no secrets back and forth between Clark and Lana. In any case, the reason Lois makes an appearance is, as you might have guessed, because of Chloe's demise. Somehow, Lois just doesn't quite buy the official story that declared the explosion of Chloe's safe house an accident, and after finding her message to Clark, she decides to track him down. As she's trying to get directions while on the road to Smallville though, there's suddenly some sort of electrical storm or something, and she gets forced off the road and actually runs right into Clark, apparently doing his best recreation of the Terminator films. That's right, it seems Clark is back from wherever he was, but he unfortunately doesn't seem to remember a thing, including his name. As such, Lois takes him to the hospital, attempting to pawn him off on the staff, not realizing who he actually is until Martha happens to spot them and decides to take Clark home. Yeah, it seems Martha has actually been coming to the hospital quite a bit, as Jonathan somehow ended up on life support after Jor-El strangled him at the end of the last season. In fact, the doctors apparently want to pull the plug on him, as he's completely brain dead and showing no sign of improvement, not to mention that Martha is running out of ways to cover his expenses. Not quite sure how being a little bit choked for not that long could really cause that much damage, but then it was done through magic by an incorporeal spirit of a super strong alien, so maybe logic isn't exactly our friend in this instance. Either way, it's during one of these visits that Martha happens to spot Clark, and after realizing that he's not quite himself and politely asking Lois to bugger off, she does, as mentioned, take Clark home, as Lois finally discovers who he is right as they disappear from her sight. Lois does eventually manage to track Clark down again, but in his current state, he's not really much help to anyone. It also seems he's not actually suffering from amnesia as much as some sort of brainwashing, as he claims to be waiting for some sort of sign, which he eventually gets thanks to the treasure hunting efforts of Lex. In case you forgot, Lex was actually poisoned at the end of Season 3, but it seems he's managed to recover from that, as he's apparently spent his time since then scouring the globe for 3 ancient artifacts. This is essentially what the overarching storyline for the season is all about, as these artifacts are actually, as you might expect, a set of Kryptonian relics supposedly left behind for Clark, even though they've apparently been here for bloody eons. Yeah, that is something that is never properly explained. When, how, and why these artifacts were actually placed on Earth. Oh, they were supposedly left by Jor-El to help guide Clark towards his destiny or whatever, but considering they're found inside a bunch of statues hidden within the most ancient of ancient ruins, they must have been placed on Earth several centuries before Krypton was ever destroyed. Are they saying the pyramids and such really were built by aliens and that those aliens were Kryptonians? Did they just somehow know that Clark would wind up on Earth as their sole survivor several centuries before even his grandfather was conceived? How the hell is all of this supposed to make sense? I suppose I might be overthinking things, maybe, as the important thing is that these stones, artifacts, or elements, as they are intermittently called, are what this season ultimately revolves around. As mentioned, Lex is the first to track one of them down, but he doesn't really get to keep it for that long. Hell, he barely even gets to see the real thing, as what he actually finds is just a statue, but while making his way back to Smallville, he accidentally drops and breaks said statue during some turbulence, revealing the hidden stone within. At the exact moment this happens though, the stone apparently sends out some sort of signal as Clark, back at the Kent farm, suddenly hears a piercing noise like the one the key to his ship sent out previously. After regaining his composure, Clark refers to himself as Kal-El and claims the time has come to fulfill his destiny. Martha tries her best to snap him out of what she believes to be Jor-El's control, but it seems Clark's picked up more than just a new name. That's right, Clark can finally fly. Sort of. The thing is that it's not actually Clark flying, it's Kal-El, and as such, he loses this ability as soon as he reverts to being his old self again. Now, this might seem like a bit of a cop-out, and that's because it very much is. In fact, the entire show was kinda designed around the idea of Clark not flying. I honestly can't remember if I've mentioned this before or not, so apologies if I repeat myself here, but the thing is that during the production of this show, its creators implemented a bit of a mandate. No tights, no flights. This meant pretty much what you might think, that Clark would not be allowed to put on his trademark tights or start flying until the show ended, which I for one think is fair enough. After all, this is supposed to be a show about Clark Kent before he actually became Superman, so not allowing the writers to make him full-on super just yet doesn't seem like that bad of an idea to me. As proven by this very scene though, they don't exactly stick to this rule in the strictest sense, as they constantly find ways to circumvent it without technically breaking it. There have already been several dream sequences where Clark flew, and in the final episode of the last season, he already technically flew for the first time, only with the assistance of the fake Kara. Here though, they take it a step further by having him fly all on his own, but oh no, that's not really breaking the rules. After all, this is Kal-El, not Clark, as they are obviously two completely different people. At least for the purposes of this particular scene. Either way, Kal-El does as mentioned fly off in pursuit of that ringing, which brings him straight to Lex's plane. After ripping its door off, Carl simply grabs the stone and flies off again, all before Lex can so much as blink. He does at least manage to survive though, as the plane does make it to solid ground without crashing, no thanks to Carl. Why exactly was Lex looking for these stones in the first place though? Well, he was somewhat interested in the caves and its mysteries and all that, so I suppose it's just a result of those investigations, but it might also have something to do with his condition after his attempted poisoning. According to his doctor, any other man would have died from the amount he ingested, but because he has a heightened immune system due to an increased white blood cell count, he only ended up with an increased blood toxicity. As seen in the season opener, this apparently means he has to have his blood filtered every 72 hours, even though this is also the last time this is ever even mentioned. No, this isn't really that big of a deal, but it is a little strange that they kinda go out of their way to point out that Lex has this condition, only to never make it a factor ever again. There are several theories as to how he might have been cured and all that, but still, why even make it a thing if it never makes even the tiniest bit of difference? It's just weird. In any case, while all of this is going on, Martha has been trying to get in touch with Dr. Swan, as she believes he might be able to help, and while a visitor does eventually arrive, it's not exactly someone she or anyone was really expecting.
I'm Bridget Crosby. Dr. Swan sent me. I can understand your hesitancy in discussing Kal-El with a complete stranger.
Dr. Swan promised Clark that no one else
He
knew.
promised that your son's secret would not leave the confines of the Foundation, and it hasn't.
That's right, it seems Dr. Swan decided to play the technicality card, as he apparently decided to share what he learned with at least one colleague. Now, you might think the inclusion of this character was just a way to get around the fact that Reeve was no longer available, as well as a way to get another cameo by way of Margot Kidder, but that's not entirely true. Yes, Reeve did sadly pass away less than 3 weeks after this episode first aired, but it was in production a fair while before that, and as such, Reeve was approached about reappearing in this season. As it happened though, he was actually busy directing a film at the time, so the producers decided to bring in this character to help fill in, as it were. They even planned to have scenes with Kidder, Welling, and Reeve all together, but as mentioned, Reeve passed away before that could actually happen. Either way, this Crosby isn't exactly all that instrumental in the end anyway, as she only makes a few appearances before getting killed off, but she does help further things along a bit, especially in this episode. It seems Martha was absolutely right in contacting Dr. Swan, as Crosby has indeed been sent to provide some help in the form of black kryptonite. What exactly does that do? Well, it sort of splits or combines the various aspects of someone's personality, I guess. The thing is that after Carl places the first stone in some altar inside a hidden chamber in the caves, he's confronted by Martha, who proceeds to shove the black kryptonite in his face. This causes both Clark and Carl to emerge from his body and fight each other, as Clark eventually prevails and reverts back to being just plain old Clark. This also has the effect of somehow waking up and fully healing Jonathan, as it seems everything is finally back to normal. Or at least as normal as all of this can actually get, I suppose. Now, if all of that didn't quite explain how black kryptonite actually works, don't worry, there's another episode that showcases its effect a bit more. It's called Onyx and starts off with Lex overseeing an experiment using kryptonite to irradiate seeds in an effort to create crops that can be grown in even the harshest of environments. As expected though, something obviously goes terribly wrong as the kryptonite turns black and ends up blasting Lex with some sort of energy that doesn't actually seem to hurt him, but it does have a rather peculiar effect.
Come on, Dr. Sinclair, I'll get you to the hospital.
That's right, it seems the black kryptonite somehow created two Lexes, and as it turns out, one of them is basically pure evil. He kills the scientist that was with him during the lab accident, he imprisons his other half in a secret room in his mansion, and he even tries to kill Clark and Chloe. As you might expect though, he doesn't exactly succeed with that last plan, but it's definitely not without consequences, as it does cause him to finally witness Clark's powers for himself. Yup, Evil Lex finds out all about Clark's powers, and as he's actually able to put two and two together, he also manages to figure out his weakness. With these two aces up his sleeve, he attempts to coerce Clark into working with him, but he obviously refuses, and eventually manages to find the other Lex and merge them back together using even more black kryptonite. Luckily, this also causes Lex to forget all about his Clark discoveries yet again, as he didn't actually make them, only his evil side did. Sure, why not? Now, this episode doesn't just showcase the powers of black kryptonite, it's also, at least in a sense, just one of the many instances of some kind of body swap shenanigans in this season. Yeah, for whatever reason, they do fall back quite a lot on this particular trope this time around, as it seems to happen every other episode. It's almost like they just didn't have any other ideas or something. It's honestly a bit distracting. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind a good body swap story every now and then, but here it really is used too much. If it's not Lex getting an evil twin, it's Lionel swapping places with Clark or some dead cheerleader possessing pretty much everyone she likes. That's not to say that this necessarily makes the episodes themselves bad. I mean, I'll always love seeing Tom Welling doing his best John Glover.
She had something sharp, like a knife.
And seeing Martha act like a ditzy teenager is fairly amusing.
Lana Lang! You can't be serious. You two are so last year.
But I still say they could have dialed this back a bit. This is Smallville after all, not Freaky Friday. All of which sort of brings me on to Lana and her new boyfriend, Jason Teagues, played by Jensen Ackles. I don't really have too much to say about Jason himself, as he's a decent enough character and Ackles plays him more than well enough, but I really don't like the whole Lana angle this season. It's honestly just awful. The thing is that Lana actually left to study art in Paris at the end of season 3, and while this landed her a new boyfriend, she also receives a bit of a gift from one of her ancestors. It seems Lana's actually descendant from some countess named Isabel that was burned as a witch, and while she's doing a brass rubbing of her tomb, this suddenly happens.
What's going on? You were supposed to meet me at 10. It's now 12. You okay?
I don't know how I got here. I must have passed out.
Yup, Lana somehow receives a magic tattoo, presumably from her witchy ancestor. Why exactly she decided to go for a tramp stamp instead of marking her shoulder or some such, I don't know, but actually I think we all know the reason for that one, don't we? In any case, this tattoo not only appears magically after Lana touches an ancient tomb of some witch, it also features a symbol from the Kawachi Caves, as people apparently knew about the Kryptonian stones even during witch hunting times. Okay, so they didn't know their true origins, as they just thought they were some sort of mythical relics full of magical power or some such, but as mentioned before, it seems these stones have indeed been around for yonks. For some reason. Either way, this whole ordeal causes Lana to return to Smallville to try and figure out what's going on, which eventually leads to all sorts of revelations, not only about Lana and Isabel, but also Jason and his family. Yeah, as it turns out, he doesn't just follow Lana to Smallville to be with her as he first claims, he was actually instructed by his mother, Genevieve, to go after Lana in order to get his hands on the Kryptonian stones. At least, I think so. The thing is that this all becomes a bit hard to keep track of eventually, as there's so much back and forth as to who's in league with each other and how much each character knows and so on, that by the end, it's not completely clear where everyone actually stands, or at least it's not that easy to remember. Oh, it's pretty clear that Jason and his mother are in cahoots to a degree, but whether Jason actually was going to betray Lana or if he wanted the stones to keep her safe is a bit less clear. It doesn't really matter that much though, as Lana and Jason do work together for most of the season, even after Lana gets possessed by her ancestor and almost kills Jason. You see, it turns out that Lana's tattoo somehow allows the spirit of Isabel to take possession of Lana's body after she touches the same symbol in Isabel's spellbook, which, by the way, she just happens to find on eBay. No, really, someone just happened to have this magical tome belonging to Lana's ancestor in their possession and decided the best thing to do with it was to sell it on eBay. Somehow, I can't really see that being part of Isabel's plan, but what the hell do I know? What really matters though is that Isabel does indeed take over Lana's body and quickly begins causing all sorts of magical havoc. As mentioned, she almost kills Jason, but she also forces Lex to play piano until his fingers literally bleed after discovering and stealing a map to one of the Kryptonian stones in his mansion. She also brews up a potion that allows two of her followers to take possession of Chloe and Lois after they drink it, meaning that yes, they really do the whole witch coven thing. How fun. I suppose this could have been an okay little side story or some such, but it's actually tied into the main plot quite a bit. I already mentioned how Isabel's whole shtick basically revolves around the Kryptonian stones, and she becomes instrumental in the retrieval of one of them. She's extensively also the only reason the Teagues are involved at all, as their ancestor actually took part in Isabel's stake burning. Isabel naturally vowed to exact her revenge on this bloodline, which is why Genevieve and Jason are so desperate to get these stones for themselves. All of which I suppose I could live with if it wasn't handled and portrayed so annoyingly. It would have been so much better if Isabel was just a separate entity, and or if they saved her for a storyline of her own or some such, as tying her into not only Lana, but the whole Kryptonian stones thing just feels so tacked on and pointless. Isabel is not an interesting or well-rounded character, she's just some witch, and while seeing Clark going up against actual magic could be interesting, as he's actually vulnerable to it, they just don't do anything worthwhile with this setup. Oh, they do have Clark confront Isabel and her wenches during her first appearance, and while he not only loses said confrontation but even ends up stripped of his powers, he still manages to banish this witch back to a tattoo and regain his powers by the end of the episode, so it ultimately has no real bearing on anything. When Isabel eventually returns, she and Clark barely interact at all, as she essentially only reappears to dig up one of the stones before getting knocked down and banished again pretty much right afterwards. The only thing she really adds to the proceedings is an absolutely essential and not at all confusing crouching tiger hidden dragon sequence. Seriously, what the hell was that? The biggest problem with Isabel though is just how awfully Kristen Kroik portrays her. Now, I don't generally have much of a problem with her acting outside of this, but when she's channeling Isabel, she just loses all semblance of verisimilitude her performance may otherwise have. Okay, so maybe the writing or some such is partially to blame as well, but the writing isn't responsible for acting as atrocious as this.
You have no idea what you're dealing with, little man.
You know it's true nature, but the map was not meant for you.
I sleep but a while. And when the time is appointed, my heir will awaken me. And I will have vengeance!
This is actually a bit of a problem Kroik has in general. Whenever she's supposedly channeling someone else, she just can't pull it off. It's a little difficult to explain, but it's like she's trying too hard. She's just being too fake. Also, she really can't pull off even an attempt at being intimidating, which ultimately just makes the whole Isabel thing fall so flat on its face that it ends up feeling like a damn joke. I absolutely hate every aspect of this plotline. I actually don't particularly like the plotlines overall this season. Or there are still certain standouts, and I hesitate to call any of it downright terrible, but this season definitely feels lacking. The overarching storyline is, as mentioned, pretty much all about those 3 Kryptonian stones, and while they do lead to some decent situations and revelations, they don't really focus that much on them either, making the entire season feel like it spends most of its time twiddling its metaphorical thumbs. There's just no real sense of progression most of the time. This isn't to say that the earlier seasons didn't have a fair amount of standalone / throwaway type episodes as well, but I just don't think the overarching plot has that much going for it this time. It really is just about everyone searching for these 3 stones for their own selfish reasons, and Clark attempting to collect them before anyone else. That just isn't a storyline with enough meat to cover an entire season. As such, we mostly get a bunch of fairly independent episodes this time around, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but it does feel like a step back. In fact, it almost feels like they're reverting to the villain of the week type episodes of the very first season, and that just doesn't feel right, especially not after the pretty engaging and coherent experience season 3 gave us. There is a bit of a theme going through this season though. In addition to the relative abundance of body-swapping stories, there also seems to be a bit of a focus on wayward souls, or strays being welcomed to the family, as it were. Seriously, there are at least 4 episodes I could easily classify under this umbrella, as well as a few others that are somewhat along the same lines, if not exactly on it. I guess the Kents just have some sort of radar that attracts these characters, I don't know. Most of these stories are fairly inconsequential and or forgettable, but there are at least 2 that are a bit more significant as they introduce a couple of recurring characters, namely Shelby the dog and Bart Allen. Shelby isn't actually that significant in the long run, as he essentially just ends up being the Kent's new pet, but he does reappear quite a bit after his initial appearance, even just during this season. Bart Allen, on the other hand, may only have 1 appearance this season, but he is quite a bit more significant, and if you recognize his name, you should already know why. He's the Flash. Well, technically Bart never actually adopts that mantle in this show, but yeah, that is essentially who he is, the fastest man alive. He may not be quite on par with his eventual Arrowverse counterpart in terms of characterization, but he is a decent enough variant. As already stated, he only makes 1 appearance this season though, so he really doesn't get to stretch his legs that much yet, but he does mark the beginning of a fairly substantial and very memorable addition to the later seasons. If you don't know what I'm talking about, this little hint from Bart himself should clue you in.
I mean, it's a big world. Figure I'd check it out, see if there's anyone else out there like us. Maybe start like a club or a league or something.
In addition to these 2 characters, there is one more I feel the need to mention, and that is Alicia. She's actually a character that was introduced in Season 3, but she's not really that significant until her reappearance here. Just to sum up though, Alicia was basically a teleporting classmate of Clark that he ended up dating for a bit after they both revealed their individual powers to each other. Unfortunately, Alicia quickly went a bit off the rails and not only became far too possessive and threatening towards Clark, she even ended up killing her own father. Clark obviously stopped her in the end though, as she ended up being committed to a sanitarium. After only a few months in there though, Alicia is back as she's supposedly been cured already. She's also received a special kind of lead-based bracelet that prevents her from using her powers, and as she's the only one he feels he can be truly open with, Clark begins dating her again, much to everyone else's disapproval. Things don't get any better when a series of suspicious attacks start happening, all from within locked rooms with seemingly no way in or out. Considering Alicia's powers, everyone believes she must be the culprit, everyone except Clark. At least initially. Yeah, while Clark starts out defending Alicia, refusing to believe she'd still be able to do such things, his convictions start to waver when he discovers that she not only removed her power-inhibiting bracelet, but he also finds her scarf at one of the crime scenes. While he still wants to believe her, he insists that she turn herself over to the police, something she naturally refuses, which leads to the main impact this all has on the coming episodes and seasons. You see, Alicia feels that people might treat her and Clark differently if they knew Clark's secret as well, so she decides to kidnap Chloe and set a bit of a trap for him.
Clark, I'm on Old Blossom Road and there's something really wrong with the car. It won't stop.
Hang on.
Just hurry. Clark, what are you... Don't worry, Chloe.
As you might expect, this revelation obviously has its share of ramifications, though not really for a while. You see, Chloe never tells Clark that she knows for the rest of the season, preferring instead to just make weird insinuating comments every now and then to the utter confusion and bewilderment of Clark. Other than one instance where Clark once again loses his memories and she essentially has to protect him from himself though, they never actually discuss this at all until the next season, but it definitely changes their relationship forever. Hang on a second though, because why is Chloe even here? Didn't she die at the end of Season 3? Well, not exactly. You see, it turns out that Chloe is actually very much alive, which Clark discovers after using his X-ray vision on her grave. After doing some investigating, Clark and Lois discovers that Lois's father, a decorated military general, actually worked with Lex to get Chloe to a different safe house in complete secrecy, as they somehow discovered Lionel's plans to have her killed. Fair enough, I suppose, except for the fact that the show itself contradicts this possibility completely. Just look at the explosion scene at the end of Season 3. It clearly shows how the safe house blows up immediately after Chloe closes its door. There is no way in hell that she or anyone else could have made it to safety as is claimed, as it would simply take far too long. Oh, you can attempt to explain this in any number of ways, but the truth of the matter is simply that they fudged up. They probably wanted to replace Chloe with Lois or some such, but for whatever reason that didn't work out, so they had to pull this non-explanation out of their collective behinds. Or maybe Chloe's actually a clone or something, I don't know. Regardless, this still isn't the lowest point of the season, not by a long shot. No, to me, the worst episode of this particular season is actually a bit tricky to narrow down, as there are several candidates. Oh, I still think most episodes are at least okay, but generally speaking, the overall quality this time is significantly lower than what came before. Even when the episode isn't that bad, it still just feels a bit, I don't know, shallow. Case in point, episode 4, Devoted. I know this is somewhat of a high school drama and all, but this seriously has to be the most high school drama nonsense of the entire show. For whatever reason, another thread they decided to weave this season was Clark signing up for the football team again. I suppose this could have been somewhat fun, but didn't we already explore this in the first season? Do we really need to go back to this again when we all know there's no chance Clark is actually going to stick with it? Hell, even the show itself points out how ridiculous it is for Clark to play football, as he couldn't possibly be on the same level as his teammates, even if he does rein in his powers.
Just because you are strong does not mean you can't get rattled out there just like anybody else.
I'm actually kind of surprised that you took the football route.
Why?
Well, I don't know, it just seems like you have kind of an unfair advantage.
A bunch of 250-pound guys banging into each other on a football field is one thing. But getting hit by you is like getting run over by a freight train. It's a big difference, son. I'm sorry, but the last place you need to be right now is out on that football field, and you know it.
Either way, he does end up joining the football team for a good part of the season, which leads to the aforementioned 4th episode, which is all about a bunch of manipulative cheerleaders. No, really, that's it. The incredible evil and mega sinister plot here is that a bunch of cheerleaders are spiking their football-playing boyfriends' drinks in order to make them subservient and suggestible. Wow, how utterly terrifying! Okay, so this is a bit bitchy, and it does result in these players going into insane jealous rages at the slightest provocation, but come on, is this really the best you can do? The last season featured, among other things, Lex having his brain fried by Lionel after he also drugged and manipulated Lex into appearing completely deranged so that no one would believe a word he might say about Lionel murdering his parents. How in the name of noodle soup do you go from something like that to a story about a bunch of cheerleaders turning their boyfriends into subservient drones? Somehow, I just don't see that quite matching up. There are plenty of other rather subpar episodes, but I do believe Devoted is the absolute low point of the season. As for the high point, that's also tricky for pretty much the opposite reason of narrowing down the worst part. There aren't too many episodes I will classify as all that great either. Don't get me wrong, there are more than a few at least passable ones, but great? Not so much. I suppose Onyx, that I already mentioned, is rather fun, if for no other reason than seeing Michael Rosenbaum having a total blast going completely ham. It's also a pretty good showcase for how and why Lex could become a very effective adversary, as he might go a bit, well, actually quite a lot over the top, but he is really ingenious and clever. Does that really make it a great episode though? Not really, but as mentioned, it is at least fun and memorable. As is the 6th episode, Transference, for many of the same sort of reasons. This is the episode where Clark and Lionel trade places, and while most of the enjoyment of the episode once again comes from Tom Welling and John Glover doing their best to embody each other's mannerisms and such, it's not a dreadful episode in its own right. Is it the best? I don't think I would say that, but it is among the better ones. It might be a bit of a cop-out, but if I had to pick a favourite episode, it would come down to a split between Onyx and Transference. I know it's not a very satisfying answer, but as neither of them are really great enough to single out and most other episodes are markedly worse, it's honestly the best I can do. This season really just isn't that brilliant. There is still plenty more to come though, and the season does end on a rather intriguing and exciting note. As mentioned more than once already, the whole season revolves around the 3 Kryptonian stones and everyone's hunt for them, and by the start of the season finale, 1 stone is already in the cave altar, 1 is missing in action, and 1 is held by Lana. That's right, it seems Lana somehow managed to pocket the stone that was found in China as she's been hiding it ever since, but unfortunately for her, Genevieve Teague manages to figure this out as she confronts Lana, demanding she hand it over.
I feel my wings have broken in your hands. I feel the words unspoken inside. When they pull you under.
In a way, Genevieve does kinda get what she wants, but certainly not in the way she hoped, as Lana is suddenly overtaken by Isabel one more time as she overpowers and kills Genevieve using the aforementioned stone. As bad as this might be in itself, it actually gets much, much worse, as it seems the stone somehow responds to being stained by the blood of man by awakening a great danger from the darkness of space. What danger, you may ask? Another meteor shower. As we'll eventually learn, there is a bit more to it than that, but for now the entire town is left scrambling as the military comes in during Smallville High's graduation ceremony to start the evacuation procedures. Unlike everyone else though, Clark decides to stay behind as he's been told by Jor-El that the only way to prevent total annihilation is to track down the stones and unite them. While all this does lead to a fairly engaging finale, it also feels incredibly rushed. It's almost like they forgot to incorporate the whole stone hunting thing for most of the season, as by the time the finale rolls around, they really do cram about half a season's worth of developments into one episode. I really don't know why Clark doesn't spend at least a bit more time looking for and possibly even finding the remaining 2 stones earlier in the season, but as it is, almost all of the overarching storyline, or at the very least most of it, actually takes place within this one final episode. They don't do the best job of condensing so much down to such little time either, as they really are all but forced to just have stuff happen because it has to. Clark needs to find the stones, but doesn't know where to look, so just have Lana show up and give him one of them without much explanation. In her own words, she just knows it belongs to him. Somehow. We also need a reason for Chloe and Lex to meet up in order to set up some events for the next season, so just have her show up in Lex's mansion to get Clark to safety after he collapses due to the kryptonite in Lex's vault, as that's where Lex places the last stone after he recovers it from Lionel when he collapses due to the stone activating after Clark places the second stone in the altar. As for Lana, she needs to get into a helicopter crash so she can discover one of the secrets of the meteor shower, namely that it's also a cover for a spaceship, so just have Lex show up to her apartment immediately after she kills Genevieve, so he has an excuse to get her to his mansion and eventually into one of his helicopters under the guise of helping her, when in reality he just wants her stone. Yeah, this episode is kind of a hectic mess, to say the least. Regardless, it all eventually culminates in Clark recovering all 3 stones and placing them in the cave altar, which causes them to merge and form some sort of crystal. When Clark grabs it, it causes some sort of strange and blinding light to envelop him, something both Chloe and Lex witness as Lex drags Chloe down there for some answers he believes she's hiding. In any case, when Clark is finally able to see again, it seems he's certainly not in Kansas anymore, but rather some vast, snowy and mountainous landscape seemingly in the middle of nowhere. What could this all possibly mean? I think you may already know.